At the start of this year, Sioux Falls Mayor Paul Tenhaken helped launch Sioux 52. It's a mentoring initiative that would unify area nonprofits, businesses, and the faith community.
4 goals from this initiative revolve around the number 52. The most important one, recruiting 5,200 mentors. That's why we're teaming up with Sioux 52 and the Downtown Rotary to introduce you to those who have participated and how it's changed their lives.
Sam Wright spoke with 2 women involved in the program and shows us how their relationship has blossomed since they were first paired together in this mentoring moment.
You might see Michelle LaValle and Brianne Maynard together, grabbing coffee or enjoying each other's company around Sioux Falls. The thing that is not quite as obvious in this friendly relationship, Brianne was initially a little intimidated when she found out Michelle would be her mentor. Michelle is the CEO of Children's Home Society and served as Billy Sutton's running mate in South Dakota's last gubernatorial race. She also made an impression on Brianne through the MB Women's Leadership Program.
I always looked at Michelle as someone who I aspired to want to be like. And you put somebody up on a pedestal for so long and you start to kind of second guess whether or not you feel like you're worthy of being in their social circle.
Ironically, one of the lessons Brianne learned with Michelle as her mentor was not to second guess yourself. Try to put the fear aside and look for opportunities to be uncomfortable and grow.
In her circumstances, she was gaining clarity of what she wanted to do next. And I am just so proud of her that at the very end of our mentoring relationship that year, she did take a job and she's leading the Zeal Center for Entrepreneurship.
You're going to make mistakes along the way, or you're going to fail, and that's part of the process too. I watched Michelle run for office. She didn't win, but she handled it with grace, and I love that she put herself out there, and that inspires me to want to run for office someday.
Michelle says it has been a joy to mentor and to focus someone's life to see them move on to better things.
I think the city of mentors is what Sioux Falls can truly be.
In Sioux Falls, Sam Wright, Dakota News Now.
And you can be a mentor and help others in our community. For more information, go to helplinecenter.org/Sioux52 or call the Helpline Center at 211.
Welcome to this weekly meeting of Sioux Falls Downtown Rotary. It's good to be back at the Holiday Inn City Center. And today we have the privilege of a program that centers on the U.S. Senate race between the incumbent, Senator Mike Rounds, and the challenger, Democrat Dan Ahlers. My name is Jack Marsh. I'm the program chair for this month for our series of election programs. I'm also a former president of this club. So let's get right to it with Dan Ahlers. Mike Rounds declined our invitation to debate today. We had hoped that we could have a debate between the 2 major party candidates. The senator declined, so we've invited Dan Ahlers to be here and to undergo. Maybe it's an inquisition, Dan. I don't know, but we have a lot of ground we'd like to cover, and so let's just kick it right off. What has prepared you to be a United States Senator? What about your background, your education at Augustana University, where you majored in government and international affairs, your 20 years in business as the operator of a movie video rental business in Dell Rapids, and also your 6 years as a state legislator. So talk about what has prepared you for this role as potentially our next U.S. Senator representing South Dakota.
Well, I think you did a good job of outlining my resume. Being a small business owner and chamber president, you are on the ground floor every day working with businesses, trying to promote your community and make the policies that I help pass as a legislator work. So not only am I familiar and have a background in policy, but also the impact of it at the ground floor. And I think those kinds of things are important. And too often we see legislation that's passed and it's real easy for us at the legislative level to say, oh, we passed it, our work's done, but it really isn't. The next and most important part is how it impacts the communities, the businesses, and the people with that legislation that we passed. So I think that is a good perspective to have. I think that it has prepared me in team building As a state legislator, I've always worked in the minority. So if you want to get anything accomplished, you have to be able to cross party lines. I've spent my entire time in the legislature working with my colleagues across the aisle. My last year in the legislature, my district mate, also the Senate Majority Leader, Chris Langer, and I worked on 4 bills together. I brought them to her. She was willing to prime sponsor them. And I think that that's evidence of my skill set and what I can do in Washington, and something that we're missing in Washington right now.
Mr. Ahlers, what makes you a Democrat? Well, what is a Democrat these days?
I think it means something a little different to everyone. I've always, felt that from my experience as a intern in the legislature on up, it just felt that there was a little more freedom to be me. I had seen many things happen as an intern early on as a legislator where I didn't feel comfortable with the process on the other side of the aisle. And I've always been able to disagree with my leadership. There hasn't been repercussions for it. And the idea that we could go in and vote our conscience was what we were told at the end of every caucus. The fact that our caucuses were open, which is not typical of every Democratic caucus around the country. It's a bit unusual, but I've always liked those things. I like the inclusion and the focus on individual rights. Those things were important to me. Where I differ is sometimes if you want to go with party labels, I have tended to be a little more fiscally conservative. But I also believe that along with that, it's about where and how we invest our dollars so that we get the most of them. So maybe a hybrid. Somebody said maybe I should be a libertarian. I said I don't know if I'll go that far, but I'm happy where I'm at, and the Democratic Party has treated me well. So.
You and Senator Rounds have not met in a debate or in any forums during this campaign, but the Republican GOP chairman for the state, Dan Lederman, has spoken out about you, and he said that that you will be promoting a socialist agenda. Talk about your political ideology. Where do you think you fit in on the political spectrum? Are you a socialist?
No, I think that it's unfortunate. Dan and I actually worked together in the legislature and got along very well. So I think some of it just gets to be party politics. But from my perspective, I've always believed it's important to invest in people. And I think that if we're investing in our roads and infrastructure, that's good for our economy. If we're making sure that the next stimulus package gets to the people that need it most, and we can fix it and make it work better than the first package, those are good things. I don't, one could argue that that's corporate socialism. But our job is to represent the people that elect us. So if I've got a mom that comes in and struggling to get health care, and she's telling me that if she takes her full-time position, she loses the Medicaid for her children, and she now has to choose between health care for her children and moving up. I think making Medicaid better, making that program work better, and allowing people to work off of it, I don't think that's socialism. I think that that's taking care of your constituents, doing the job that you were elected to do and represent the people. So where do you think you fit in on that political spectrum, that ideological spectrum from left to right? I would say moderate, just because I try to take a more sensible problem-solving approach to things. And, I want to bring both sides together, so that naturally draws you towards the middle. It makes you have to look at compromise, and we're not always going to get everything we want, but if we can move the needle forward, I consider that progress.
What motivates you to run for the United States Senate?
That's a good question. In 2019, March of 2019, I closed my business, and if you'd have told me at that point that I was going to be running for United States Senate, I probably would have laughed at you and told you that wasn't on my radar. But as I watched the dysfunctionality of Washington, the fighting, the partisanship, we've had a couple of government shutdowns. Things weren't happening. And I go, I know we can do better. And I was talking about it with friends and former colleagues, and knowing that what we were able to accomplish in Pierre by working together, I said, we need more of that in Washington. So someone had to step up, and I decided that I would step up.
So do you think that that dysfunctionality extends to the United States Senate? as an institution, is the U.S. Senate in trouble?
I think we are at a critical moment because it has become so hyper-partisan that people are more concerned about power, and that's on both sides of the aisle, than actually doing their job, which is representing the people, their constituents, the people of their states. And that is what I'm worried about there. And you see it in a variety of areas. You even see it with the politicizing of the Supreme Court, and even Justice Roberts has expressed that concern. So I think that we need more people willing to work together. When we can work together, great things happen. George McGovern, Bob Dole have created a lot of this country's food programs that have now gone global. And I think, and I could be wrong with this, but I think one of those food programs was just recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize. You have strange characters, strange bedfellows like Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton that are actually friends and find ways to get together. And people like Tom Daschle and Trent Lott that found ways to make things happen. And we can return to that in Washington if we send the right people there.
The Senate has been called in the past the world's greatest deliberative body. Does that still apply today?
We're not seeing it. I'm sure there are people that are deliberative and that mean well, but right now you're seeing a lot of partisanship, and that so it's hard to see. And when things aren't happening at all, when we're passing budget extensions instead of new budgets, I don't know that you can call that deliberation. I call that procrastination.
Let's get into several topics and issues. We'll try to cover a wide range here. Let's begin with impeachment. Would you have voted to convict and remove President Trump based on the evidence that was presented and available?
Probably not. There was more that I wanted to see. I think the Senate had an opportunity to hear more. I would have liked to have heard that before making a decision. But I thought the impeachment process, once again, felt politicized and was unhealthy. And I think that the problems in this country go far deeper than one person right now.
But based on the evidence that was presented, you did not think there was grounds for conviction and removal of the president?
No.
Today, the Senate Judiciary Committee began its confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Coney Barrett. As you know, this is a very contentious situation with former Vice President Biden saying, quote, "The voters should pick the president and the president should pick the justice." Nonetheless, President Trump has advanced his nominee, and that process is underway. How do you feel it is appropriate for the Senate to move ahead with a confirmation with the current Senate, or would you have preferred that it waited until after the election and the seating of a new Senate?
Well, this close, I would prefer for it to wait, but there are no rules that say when a Supreme Court nomination should be when the hearing should happen. If you went by the precedent that was set in 2016, then absolutely. With Merrick Garland, then absolutely not. But once again, there are no rules that dictate that. The politicizing of the Supreme Court is what I'm more concerned about. I am concerned that this is being rushed to promote an agenda, and the Supreme Court is there to balance the powers of government. It's there to interpret the Constitution. It is there to promote equal justice under the law, and it is there to protect individual rights. I would be willing to, if I were there right now, I would be willing to interview and listen to Amy Coney Barrett. I have looked at her resume and, read some of her opinions on her own personal beliefs as well as some of the cases she's ruled on. The biggest concern is that there's such a small sample size. I would certainly like to be there to answer questions, but I would not be asking the questions that I would think people are typically. I've heard a lot about the questions with regards to the Affordable Care Act, with regards to Roe versus Wade. I'm more concerned about how she would interpret the Constitution, what philosophy she has going into that, and then maybe looking at some of her other court rulings from her time as a federal judge, and be asking more pertinent questions.
So if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed and becomes our next Supreme Court justice, and if the Democrats win both the White House and take over the Senate, Chuck Schumer has said that a lot is on the table. Do you think that if that were to happen, would you favor increasing the size of the Supreme Court from 9 to 11? It's been at 9 since 1860. Would you support increasing the size of the Supreme Court?
No, because they're doing it for political purposes, which is what I was just talking about earlier. That is not the solution. I would be in favor of bringing Senate rules that help have guidelines for the next appointees, so that we have a structure in place that everyone has to abide by the same rules, so that we can get rid of some of the politics out of this. Those things I would be in favor of, but stacking courts is not the answer. Donald Trump is president right now. This is his nominee. And if the Senate chooses to appoint her to the Supreme Court, then that's the way it is. And then we have to move forward.
Let's talk about COVID. And let's begin with I'll say the public health response of this country under the president's leadership. How do you, we have now 215,000 Americans dead. How do you assess our response to this public health crisis?
The initial response was too slow. We needed to act sooner. We needed to listen to the experts. This was not a new concept. For a couple of decades, members of Congress, former presidents have all been apprised of the possibility of a pandemic or other natural catastrophes. We needed to have a better plan. We could have acted sooner. We could have put simple guidelines in place that would allow this country to continue to move forward and limit the number of people that died, limit the amount of spread. It doesn't mean that we have to lock down a country, though. I think once things got going, we started, and we had ramped up supplies. It ran smoother. Each state has done things a little differently. I do think that there needed to be some clear-cut guidelines to help provide guidance to local governments. As a chamber president, working with my local community, my local government, my businesses, we were ahead of the game. We were paying attention. We decided to start communicating with our businesses. I met with our businesses. I met with our city administrator and city government. We talked about possible plans. We were doing carry-out parking spots well before Sioux Falls was. I just went in, and it's the beauty of a small town. Sometimes it goes a little faster, but I said, hey, Justin, I need carry-out parking spots for all my bars, coffee shops, and restaurants. Is this going to be a problem? Can we put signs out? He says, go do it. When it came to the payroll protection program, I contacted all of our banks, said, who's going to be working with us on this? And then finding out each business, do you have an accountant? If so that we could get that, we could stay ahead of the game. Even though we didn't know all the rules yet, we could help our businesses prepare and then help them connect with their customers in a better way. And I am proud to say that I cannot tell you of a single business that closed in my hometown over this pandemic. So I think by and large, where we weren't perfect, we were proactive. Our businesses were able to stay open, and we were able to mitigate a lot of that initial problem.
So you referred to guidelines, but do you think that there should have been mandates or still should be mandates imposed regarding social distancing, wearing of masks? Or do you think it should simply stay as guidelines?
Well, I like the CDC guidelines. I think there are certain instances where it's hard to abide by those. each community or each state needs to do what works best for them. What works for New York doesn't work for South Dakota, just as what works for Sioux Falls doesn't apply to Lemon, South Dakota. So there has to be some flexibility and some common sense to that. But I do know that when the governor removed the guidelines and just kind of pushed that all by the wayside, we had a lot of local governments and communities around Sioux Falls, including Sioux Falls, that were all working and collaborating together that felt like the rug was pulled out from underneath them. And it makes it hard to justify what you're doing when leadership at the top is not supporting you.
Let's shift now to the economic fallout from this pandemic and what how Congress should act going forward regarding further stimulus and relief packages.
Well, when we look at the next stimulus package with respect to businesses, the PPP offered an option of 75% of that money going to payroll. Well, not every business is payroll heavy. My before and after school program that I was on the board for, 75% of that, payroll. But for the deli owner, for the coffee shop owner, for the dress shop on Main Street, that's not practical. It's not. It doesn't give them the flexibility to keep their businesses open and operate. Or for the small business owner who's their only employee to even have access to that type of grant funding.
So what should be in the next package?
A more flexible grant/loan program. I think that we need to have investment in infrastructure. One of the great things that helps drive our economy is a solid infrastructure. And this country's infrastructure is aging and needs repair. Not just roads and bridges. We're talking about utilities. We're talking about internet and broadband. Those are the kinds of things that our economy functions and thrives on. Not only would that help improve our economy in the future and is a wise investment, it also puts people that may be out of a job to work right now. And it takes the pressure off the unemployment system. It takes, there are just a lot of possibilities there that if we were thinking outside the box and looking at what we need down the road, we could really be doing something great right now in a time where we're really struggling with this healthcare crisis.
The PPP and other other bailouts or other assistance programs, and the possibility of even more, is putting tremendous strain on our deficit. The national debt alone is now at $27 trillion. That's $82,000 per U.S. citizen, $27 trillion. And we've seen the federal budget deficit soar this year, now sitting at over $4 trillion. How worried should we be about the deficit and the national debt?
With regards to the stimulus, I don't worry about that as much contributing to the national debt, because if you invest it properly, you can really have a lasting benefit to your economy, which will help pay down on that debt. I was concerned about the debt and the rate that it was growing prior to the pandemic. So I try to separate those two things. But then once again, it comes down to how we invest our dollars. How do we make them go a little bit farther? My time on appropriations, I know that Governor Dugard wanted to expand Medicaid. The 2016 election happened. The results were different than expected. He kind of scrapped that plan. But in the legislature, our Appropriations Committee was committed to finding ways to increase reimbursements to service providers, increase the number of physicians that could accept Medicaid reimbursement, and we even increased the number of people that could get or be covered under Medicaid. And we did that without increasing taxes. We did it by taking dollars and investing them better.
But the question is the national debt.
Yeah, but that's how you get to it.
But I mean, should we be worried that the national debt has soared to this level?
Yes, absolutely. But that's why we need people in there that are committed to working on that problem, that are committed to taking those dollars and investing them better, so that you can slow down that increase. It's so bad at this point. There's no way to 180 this ship and turn it around. You need people that are practical, that can sit there, have a long vision, and set a goal, and then work towards that goal. And that's something that I believe I can bring to the table.
Tax policy. Joe Biden says that he would roll back President Trump's tax cuts of 2017, and specifically he's talking about corporate taxes and taxes on the wealthy. Quote, nobody making under $400,000 would have their taxes raised, period, bingo, end quote. What's your position on rolling back President Trump's tax cuts of 2017?
You know, I haven't taken a strong stance on that, mainly because the tax code is so messy, and that I think
so. Still under review.
It's still under review. I want
Right.
to see more information. I've heard a willingness by many large business owners, billionaires, millionaires that have said, I want to contribute more. So I want to hear from them too, and I want to see, how do you want to contribute more? What's your plan? How can we make this work better? Because I think that trying to go at it just from haves and have-nots has been an approach that has not worked. So I think
Still under study.
Still under study.
All right. Military spending. If you pull out COVID, about half of our discretionary spending in the federal budget goes for the military. Just in this budget, current budget, I think it's $738 billion. Some people calculate it differently. It's even more. Is that, for military spending, is that too much, too little, or just right?
Well, if you ask Eisenhower would tell you it's too much.
Well, what do you say?
I would agree with him. There is wasteful spending in all aspects of government. My brother has spent 26 years in the military now. I've heard some interesting stories about
so you would favor reducing the military budget?
I wouldn't just slash it, though. I think that there has to be a bigger conversation. There are things, spending, a simple example, housing off a base. My brother's a lieutenant, and then you have a colonel. They are living in the same housing, and that landlord is getting two different rates based on what
rank.
On rank. That doesn't make sense.
Federal minimum wage, unchanged since 2009. That's $7.25 an hour. Should the federal minimum wage be increased?
It probably should be. What that rate is.
Would you index it?
We have in South Dakota. It seems to have worked all right. As a small business owner, it worked for me. I would seek more input, though, because the minimum wage for South Dakota, it shouldn't be the same as the minimum wage for California or Oregon or Texas, because there's different costs of living. So doing it at a federal level, you have to be really careful, because you're setting bars that can have impact.
So it should be increased. You're not sure how much?
I'm not sure how much.
Affordable Care Act. What should be retained? What should be eliminated? What should be changed in the Affordable Care Act?
That's a tough one. I'm still there has to be a greater conversation with healthcare, and the players all have to be sitting at the table. I think when you have everyone sitting at the table, you start to find out a little more. But certainly pre-existing conditions, while that contributed to the initial increase in health insurance coverage, overall health insurance coverage is at a far lower rate than what it was prior. And I think there are some strategies that we can implement with incidents of care that could help, that other states have done. So maybe we can implement something like that at the national level that would help reduce those health insurance increases.
Any other major?
I think that it's been good that our youth, our college students have been able to stay on their health and their families' health insurance programs.
You would keep that?
I think we should keep that. But there's so much there. There's prescription drugs, and why are we paying so much more here than they are in other countries? Same product, different prices. There's a lot to be learned. And I think the most important thing is that instead of talking about it, I'm willing to go there and do the work, do the research, and be informed. so that we can actually solve the problem instead of just talking about it.
Should Medicaid reimbursement be increased for service providers?
I know it needs to be in South Dakota. Medicaid reimbursement here is below the actual costs, and that impacts private pay individuals too. They are forced to pay a greater share of that. That's not fair to those folks, and eventually those folks run out of money, and then they end up on a Medicaid too. So I think we need to do a better job of assessing what actual costs are. That happens to be a state issue though, but the federal government can do a better job to working with the states to help provide more options and an easier process for things like Medicaid waivers.
Social Security and Medicare, are you concerned about the solvency of that system, and what would you do to address that?
Well, I think the biggest thing was the biggest one is Social Security, because we have borrowed money from that so often to pay on the deficit. We are jeopardizing that. We're jeopardizing the retirement for tens of millions of Americans who have been paying into this program their entire life, let alone the future, those of us that are in my generation, the generation below, ever seeing those benefits. So I would advocate changing laws, rules, so that we can no longer borrow from Social Security, that we have a payment plan to repay what is owed to that to help make it solvent. I think we can look to our South Dakota retirement system and some of the methods that we've used there to ensure that we have a 100% funded system, and we can apply those same criteria or principles to Social Security.
Do you think the retirement age should continue to move up?
Well, you know, that has to be analyzed after you, I mean, it can be part of the conversation because we do live longer, but the biggest impact on Social Security right now is that when it was created, there were 6 people paying in to every one person receiving benefits. Today, it's 3 people paying in to every one person. So those types of things, you know, those issues are of greater concern, and making sure that we find out, you know, how we're going to pay what we already owe back. Those are the initial challenges. You don't want to start making a complete system change until you have a plan to take care of the immediate issue, because then you're making decisions based on you know, without all the information, I guess.
Salary cap, should that be adjusted? Right now, $138,000, I believe, is the maximum, and that point you don't no longer have to pay Social Security taxes. Should that be increased?
I think that has to be ongoing. That has to be an ongoing review because of inflation.
Okay.
We make more, things go up. If you're going to keep up with the cost of living for Social Security, that has to be on the table.
Okay. Student loan debt. 45 million borrowers in this country owe $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. Should we allow the refinancing of interest? Should we allow for some level of debt forgiveness? Should we allow bankruptcy of federally guaranteed student loans?
Well, I think we want to avoid bankruptcy because that impacts what you have going forward for the next group of students. You're talking to someone who had to work 40, 50 hours a week to pay for college, who still came out with a tremendous amount of student debt. So when South Dakota leads the nation with about $32,000 of student debt, you know, per student. So I understand where they're at, and it limits your options. That's the one thing that I can tell you as someone who's experienced this, is that it limits your options coming out of college. And if you want people to stay in South Dakota, if you want people to remain here and contribute to the economy, we're going to have to do something. I think allowing them to refinance and having lower interest rates is important.
Should there be some level of debt forgiveness?
I think if we have critical need areas and we can address those needs and encourage people to fill those positions, then I think that that's important. I am not someone who is about giving everything away, because if you completely give it away, you don't have ownership. There's no buy-in on your part, and you don't fully appreciate what you've accomplished. So there still has to be that buy-in. It's a two-way street, but certainly the costs are exceeding the benefit. They seem to be getting to that point where they're exceeding the benefit.
So looking ahead, do you think that college should be available, public education should be available for free, particularly at the community college level?
I don't know how you afford it. I mean, it's a nice thought. I think there are certainly opportunities to reduce tuition. I've seen it, as an appropriator for our universities. We have universities that struggle to get students, but they have fantastic donors who've helped build great buildings, these really nice buildings, but no students to fill them. I'm like, why not channel your energy, channel your dollars into making college more affordable for the next generation of alum that are going to come through your school? I mean, if you really, so I think there's potential there. I think there's potential for industry to be involved. I think that there is, I think that there should be a commitment at both the state and federal level, because you are, there will be a benefit to our economy the more people we have educated, and that those that are, we need these people in these critical needs areas, and there's fewer and fewer students. That's the one thing I learned when I was appointed to the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. The Board of Regents asked me to be their representative, and I went to these meetings. The number of students is decreasing. So the only way we're going to expand our workforce is to access low-income people that are not, don't have the financial ability to go to college. So it's got to be, but it has to be a balance, because we can't foot the entire bill.
Part of your platform is to provide greater access to early childhood education. Does that include publicly funded pre-K?
I would like to see that as a possibility. Once again, when you think of those that need it the most, it usually comes in the low income side. Those are the students that end up showing up to school behind. And I've witnessed it as someone who has spent 12 years on a before and after school program. The kids that are unable to participate. Dell Rapids doesn't have enough low income people to qualify for a lot of those programs. And I worked hard to find ways to get those kids in our programs. And when they were able to get into those programs, they really flourished and they caught up to the other students. Getting those kids a good start is really important. Now, if someone chooses not to participate in that, that is completely up to them, just as it is up to them whether or not they want to homeschool or send their kid to a private school.
Well, here's a segue then. What about school choice? Do you believe that, what is your position on public funding of private education, private schools, whether that be through vouchers, whether it be through charter schools or some other vehicle? I don't know. I haven't really taken a strong stance on that. I certainly, as a legislator, I helped with the homeschooling and allowing homeschool students to be able to participate in more of the public school activities. It is a choice to go to private school. I went to private school when I started. I went to St. Mary's in Dell Rapids, and that was my parents' choice. I got a good education there. I didn't finish there because I moved, but I think that private education provides a lot of value. I went to a private college. I didn't, but it was all a matter of my choice, my responsibility to take care of it. So don't have a position yet on public funding of private schools.
I guess I need to hear a really good case of why we should, because what happens is my concern is that we take money away from public education systems that everybody contributes to fund a private school, but it's a private school that as a local government you have no control over. I guess there's less regulatory control on what happens in those schools, I guess.
How do you find the right balance, Mr. Ahlers, between law and order and criminal justice and policing reform?
Communication and investment in those communities, but that has to happen with the involvement of law enforcement. both my grandfather and great-grandfather were law enforcement officers. And I have a community of these highway patrolmen and sheriffs and those that are involved in our school district. One just retired. I mean, the kids love that officer. They had a relationship with that officer. I remember growing up as a kid, our local police people were the ones that went door to door, checked business doors, and called you if they found your door was unlocked. So we need that type of policing. And I think if you get those types of people, those types of officers in those communities that need it the most, and you start building those relationships, things get better. We need training that helps reinforce that too. I've been involved. I love being on appropriations. You get to be involved in everything. But we were involved with officer training at the state level. And, you know, that was always a concern for us as appropriators, that we had good quality officer training, that we weren't contributing to these problems that we're seeing in other places. That doesn't mean there aren't bad players. That doesn't mean our training is necessarily flawed, but we can continually ask those questions. And I think from a legislative standpoint, we need to continue to ask those questions, follow up, and be involved in the process. But we need to make sure that our communities and our law enforcement have the resources and tools they need to work together.
Climate change. What's your position on climate change? Is it real? Is it does human activity contribute to it? How concerned should we be about climate change?
Well, I think we absolutely contribute to it. Every time we fly in a plane, turn on a car, flip a light switch, throw a piece of garbage on the ground, we have an impact on the environment, typically a negative impact. So because not everybody agrees at what degree that happens, I've taken that approach that if we know that the things that we do have a negative impact, how do we minimize them? Because that's the only way we start a conversation, and we can work with our colleagues that maybe don't buy into climate change as much as we do, but know that we have that negative impact. I like to talk about conservation. You know, I'm a member of Ducks Unlimited, and while it's hunting, it's also about conservation. I also think about it from the agricultural standpoint. When you want to do more to improve the environment, we've got a great economy built around agriculture that is moving in that direction, with cover crops, with no-till, with buffer strips, they're already finding ways to lower carbon emissions, to take the waste from their animal and their confinement systems and then use it as fertilizer, so that you're not taking harmful chemicals and putting it in your water supply. So we have the leaders out there that in the industry that are trying to make those changes, that are trying to improve the environment. We just need leadership that's willing to help them make that happen just a little bit faster, but be cognizant of those policies. Because what happens when we just make a policy change, I recall I lived in Gillette, Wyoming, so coal was really big, the Powder Basin. But I remember that the emissions policies that impacted the coal industry in Virginia, Gillette thrived because it was a low sulfur, low emission coal. But Virginia did not. And you go to Virginia and West Virginia, and you go through those small towns that were impacted by the policy change, and they're ghost towns. They're areas of high unemployment, of people that are underserved medically, from a healthcare standpoint. We have to have policymakers that understand that if we're going to make this change, how do we help the industry come along with us? And that means we have to invest in that too. We have to invest in making sure that when we're creating those green new jobs, that we have the training to take people and move them from one place to the next, and help them help themselves. And I think that that's where the industry has to be involved in this too. Imagine how fast we could change and adapt to more green energy if the fossil fuel companies were on board with us. People chuckle and laugh when I say that, because like, you're never going to get them to do that. I go, when was the last time we sat down at the table and had a conversation with them? When did we include them in the process?
Let's shift to the nation's infrastructure, roads and bridges. Is now the time that we should be increasing the gas tax or having a fee based on number of miles driven in order to pay for roads and bridges in this country?
Well, there's two components to that. You have the state level of funding, and then you have the federal. So if we're just talking about the federal, I think we do need to take a look at the gas tax, or how we fund, even if we're going beyond the gas tax. What's a better way to fund our infrastructure? Because the ability, the buying power of that gas tax has continued to diminish. The only time that we're getting a benefit that's greater than is when the oil prices are way down, and we're able to buy more for that, for that same amount of money.
So should motorists be charged a fee based on the number of miles they drive instead of?
I don't think that's a good method, mainly because it varies. You have people that still need that infrastructure in New York City but don't drive, where you have people in South Dakota that drive between Dell Rapids and Sioux Falls every day. I don't know that that's, and because of the sparsity of a state like South Dakota, driving is important. So I don't think that that's a valuable solution. I did help create a formula when I was on the Highway Needs and Financing Task Force. Had they had we passed that legislation, we would have evened out our tax structure locally here and improved funding, and only increased, had a minimal increase across the board for drivers in South Dakota. But I like to base things on mathematical formulas, because you need to find equity in that tax structure. So I would hold out till I have more information.
What's your position on abortion? Are you pro-life or pro-choice?
Personally, I can never imagine the situation where my wife and I would make that choice. But the world isn't black and white, and sometimes people have their choice taken away from them. And I'm not going to be the person that takes it away again.
So pro-choice position.
Yeah, I guess you'd call it. I don't like abortion. I don't agree with it personally. But the law makes distinctions, just as it makes distinctions as when somebody comes into your home, regardless of their intent, whether it was by accident because they stumbled in drunk or they were there to rob you. If you shoot them, it's your legal right. Is it still murder? It's still murder.
Second Amendment. I know in the state legislature you took a fair amount of heat because you opposed allowing guns on state university campuses. You also, I believe, took a position where people who conceal and carry, you thought they should have special permits. What is your position on gun rights versus gun safety and gun restrictions?
Well, it's funny that they focused on the 3 that I didn't vote for, because of the 12, I voted for 9. And if there was an R behind my name, I would have had a B+ or an A-. Instead, I got a D from the NRA, which still puts me higher than every other Democrat. So I call that an accomplishment. But with respect to guns on campus, the student body and the universities, the Board of Regents, came and said, we don't want this legislation. We want to be able to determine the policy on our campus. I said, okay, I can accept that. So I did not vote for that legislation. The next year, the universities and the student body brought back a plan they felt they could live with, and I supported it. So it's not that I don't support people's rights. I'm also listening to the people that it impacts. With regard to there was a open carry in the Capitol bill that I voted against. And there, law enforcement came to us and asked us not to support that legislation. They had undercover officers, of which we have no knowledge who they are, that are carrying and there for our protection. So in a live shooter situation, that officer pulls out a gun, and I don't know that he's an officer. I just see a guy with a gun. I turn around and shoot him. That's not, and they're there for our safety. They asked us. I trusted law enforcement, and I supported them. When it came to the carry permits at that time, and I believe this was what the situation was. It's been a while, but they wanted to get rid of a concealed carry permit at the time. And the Secretary of State came to us and said that provides our licensure, the reciprocity in other states. And then they also have a permit that's higher, that's accepted in like 36 or 38 states. And they made a compelling argument. And I listened to what the people that implement those programs said. And the Secretary of State at the time, was also a gun supporter. So I don't think that the three that I voted against were unreasonable.
Immigration. Should there be a path to citizenship and legal residency for those who entered this country illegally, whether they were minors or adults?
Well, the vast majority of those that are considered illegal or undocumented entered this country legally. It's a failure of the system.
Because they overstayed their visas.
And there's no mechanism. So there's also not much of a mechanism for them to engage with the process to resolve the problem. Most of them don't do it intentionally. So we do need a better immigration program, one that works faster, one that helps our country address our economic needs while also promoting the national security. And I think that is something that Republicans and Democrats generally agree on, but for some reason, they've allowed politics, the partisanship, to get in the middle of something that could really be beneficial for our country. In fact, if it wasn't for those immigrants that are here in this country today, in the last decade, Social Security would already be in jeopardy. They're helping hold that system up with 11 million legal, now citizens, immigrants, that have contributed and helped sustain that system for other people that have paid in for years.
U.S. Postal Service, should it be self-sustaining, or should it be recognized as an essential service that will forever require a significant government subsidy?
I think it should be considered an essential service. The post office continually gets held to a different standard than other areas of government. When was the last time that we asked the military to make us money? Yet they provide an essential service. For South Dakota, that U.S. Postal Service also serves UPS and FedEx. In our small rural communities, those UPS, FedEx drivers drop packages off, and USPS completes that process. For our small businesses, it is essential. It is the most affordable option for small business owners. And you look at these small business owners or single, independent in-home businesses in rural areas, they depend on that service. And most importantly, the vast majority of our senior citizens in South Dakota rely on that USPS system to get their prescription medication. So I think that you can find efficiencies. That is a conversation we should have. We should make things run as efficiently and affordable as possible. Because it's a service that we benefit from, we should certainly contribute to it with postage and a variety and taxpayer dollars. But the balance needs to be struck there. And I'm not sure why this particular public service has been targeted and held to a different standard.
We have 9 tribes in South Dakota considered sovereign nations. On this Native American Day, how would you assess U.S. Tribal relations? Is the United States acting honorably in meeting both its treaty and humanitarian obligations to sovereign Indian nations?
We are not meeting our obligations. There is a general lack of trust, there's virtually no trust with the federal government or state government for that matter. We act independently and then wonder why they're mad later because we didn't involve them in the process. I want to be that bridge that helps open those lines of communication. Just from my legislative experience, so many laws were passed and the tribes would show up and they would be upset. They called the one the riot boosting bill. It wasn't about rioting, but because for most of those tribes, they were there doing peaceful protests about their land, their environment, their water supply. But the state decided to make a policy without involving the tribes in that process. And they were, well, why are they mad? Well, I wonder, you didn't involve them. We need to show a little more respect, but it's going to have to start at the federal level. We're going to have to make that initial, we're going to have to make that that initial olive branch. We're going to have to take some action. We're going to have to make sure that we live up to some of these treaty commitments with regards to health care, with regards to economic development, education, and show a genuine effort and willingness to listen. And then I think we can find some real opportunity. And like I said, not everyone is a bad player in this, and no one side is completely without fault. But because we have not lived up to our obligations at the minimalist level, when you can't get basic health care on a reservation, we have not fulfilled that treaty obligation. So it's incumbent upon the federal government to make that first step.
Both sides in the presidential election say that this may be the most important election, certainly in our generation, in our time. How concerned are you about the health of this democracy?
I am concerned by the constant attack on institutions, whether it be the Supreme Court, whether it be our media, and they certainly have not always behaved the best. But without our free press, without our media, how do we protect democracy? When it comes to our own government agencies and departments, the barrage of negativity and false information and the undermining of those institutions is dangerous. We need leadership that will stand up and speak out against those falsehoods. We need people that are willing to work across the aisle to get things done. And right now we're not seeing that. And it gives our enemies an opportunity to discredit democracy. When you look at all these young democracies across the globe and they see what's going on in the United States right now, it gives those governments in Russia, those governments in China, the ability to look and say, see, there's that bright shining city on a hill and it ain't working.
You're elected to the United States Senate. What are 5 guiding principles that you'll pledge to follow and you won't waver from? 5 guiding principles.
Integrity and honesty. I will always be upfront with you. We may not always agree, but you'll always have my attention. You'll always, I will be accessible. As I was as a state legislator, I will be in Washington. I'm not changing my cell number once I get elected, if I get elected. You will still be able to call me. I won't be able to answer all the time because I might be in a committee hearing. But those things are important to me. And I've always lived by those principles. And when people call me now, they're like, I actually got the candidate? I said, yes, you have the candidate. Because those things are important to me.
Integrity, honesty, accessibility.
Yep.
2 more.
I think that determination to get work done, to not accept the status quo, and to be able to not give up and just say, well, that's the way Washington is. We get asked, I get asked that a lot. What's going to make me different from everyone else we sent to Washington? And I'm 46 years old. I've moderated, but I haven't changed. I believe that we can make a difference, and I don't give up. There's a few former colleagues in the audience here. I think they would probably tell you that too. I will promise to always work in a bipartisan manner. I think finally that is the most important thing. Unless we can sit down and have a conversation, unless we can find points that we can agree on, we're never going to get anything done. And we were able to get things done in Pierre because we were able to work together and find ways that we can get together. Whether it be, I said, when you look at a good job, a strong economy, when you look at affordable health care, when you're looking at a quality education, those aren't Democrat or Republican issues. Those are people issues. And when you look at it that way, it makes your job very easy to focus in on what's important. And then those labels kind of fall down to the side, and you go out and you hang out with your Republican colleague and you figure out a way to get Feeding South Dakota an extra $2 a month for TANF. You figure out how you're going to help your service providers get reimbursement that actually matches their costs. You find a way to get more money to education so that you can provide a quality education to the young people of South Dakota.
The voters of this state have a choice between Dan Ahlers, the Democrat, and the incumbent Republican Senator Mike Rounds. Dan Ahlers, why should you deserve and earn the vote of South Dakotans?
Well, I wish that we had both been here today so that people had the opportunity to do that compare and contrast. It's an important part of the process, but the reason I think that you should vote for me is because I genuinely care about the people that I serve. It's always been the way I've handled myself as a business owner. It's the way I've handled myself as a state legislator. You guys always come first above all else. And the work that I do is the work that you give to me. So when you're telling me what's important, those are the things I work on. And that's what I think our members of Congress, our members of our state legislature should be doing. And that is my primary concern. If you want someone that's going to show up and work for you every day, I'm sitting right here. You send me to Washington, I won't let you down.
Dan Ahlers, we thank you for being here today, for this exchange, for you being so responsive to my questions. And with that, we'll call Jesse forward to close out the meeting. Jesse.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
So next week, our program is looking ahead. American democracy at a crossroads. We have retired Supreme Court Justice.
That is not next week. That's in 2 weeks.
Okay, so what is it next week, Jack?
So next week, we will have leadership from the Republicans and the Democrats in the South Dakota State Legislature talking about the difference in the party platforms and why you might want to support generally one party over the other in the state legislature.
Okay, so this is what happens when you're no longer the president. You don't know what happens on any given day. So with that, I will say Rotary's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.